Good evening. It's 7:32, Wednesday, April 9th. Welcome to the work session. We're going to do the pledge and then start the meeting. To the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. What they decided after years to somehow change it now? Okay. Oh, all righty. So, let me just start. If trustees want to make some public announcements.
I just wanted to note.
Oh, no, he's taking it apart. Okay, Dana, you're on.
Sorry, I just wanted to note the passing of someone from our community who was a mainstay and a very important part of the arts community. Jill Kiefer was present at Bethany. She was an art historian, a professor, a teacher, a mentor, past president of the Ossining Arts Council, and very much someone who led the way in the history of art, the practice of art, the love of art, and she will be missed.
Thank you for that. Bob? Oh, I thought you said you have an announcement. Okay. Do you have anything, Pat? Do you have anything, Omar? Okay. So just wanted, so I don't forget, to wish everybody, I think the Jewish holiday of Passover starts this weekend. It's an 8-day holiday. And so I wish everybody a happy, for those that celebrate, a very happy holiday for the 8 days. And next week's meeting is Thursday at 6 p.m. It's a legislative session. And just wanted to put that out there, and we'll do a second reminder through other communication venues. So thank you. And I think we can get started with what I think will be a very interesting work session.
Good evening, everyone. Stuart is going to kick off tonight's agenda with a discussion on the Verizon, or a briefing on the Verizon franchise agreement. So with that, I will turn it over to Corporation Counsel.
Thank you, Village Manager, and good evening. We're joined tonight by Paul Train, who is an attorney from Massachusetts, who is outside counsel to Verizon. Mr. Train and I, as well as with other folks from Verizon, have been in discussions with regard to renewing the franchise agreement with Verizon. It is a proposed 5-year agreement with Verizon. The two significant changes, well, really the one significant change, deals with the PEG, or public education government money that is paid. That up to now has been basically the formula is $1.35 per month per subscriber. Over time, those numbers have dropped, the number of subscribers. So what Verizon has offered here, and what it is in fact doing in other communities, is essentially to put a flat number on that for the next 5 years, which in our case would be $29,000. Just to put that in perspective, in 2024, the Village PEG revenue from Verizon was $27,990. And just so the board is aware, that has been on a fairly steady decline since 2019, when it was at a high of $38,000, and it has been going down every year. And so you're seeing a drop in those numbers. So this would flatten it, so that if in fact there is still a drop off in subscribers, which, as I will go into in a moment with gross revenue, you will not be hit by that amount. Just for an example, using the $1.35 and dividing it out, looking at the numbers, in 2019, you had approximately 2,300 subscribers. In 2024, you're down to 1,700. And that has been a steady decline. There has been no year where it's actually gone up. We do have a second franchise agreement that is with Cablevision Altice that is about to expire. They're actually in discussions with the town now. They'll then get into discussions with us. The agreements are fairly the same. I've actually looked at the agreements from Elmsford, from Tarrytown, from Yonkers. They're all pretty much the same information. One of the things that Mr. Train and I discussed was adding another, if you want to call it, outlet at the courthouse. We now have them here. We have them at the community center, and we have them at Ossining High School. We would add one as well at the courthouse. We've also had discussions about possibly getting some new cable boxes, and Jamie, I know, is having some communications with their folks. Paul, is there anything I left out?
No, I think you covered it. I would just add that, Stuart, since we last talked, that Verizon did agree to add 86 Spring Street as a PEG access location. So that'll be in the next draft that I send you. That'll be included.
Wonderful. I don't know if now, just so the board is aware of the process, the New York State law requires a public hearing. So if the board is agreeable, next week there would be a resolution to call for a public hearing. That public hearing would be in early May. And at the conclusion or at the public hearing, the next meeting, then there would be a resolution authorizing the village manager to sign the agreement, the renewal agreement with Verizon, which, as I said, is a 5-year agreement. And then there's various processes that have to go through with the Public Service Commission to ultimately get it filed. But at least there would be an agreement between the village and Verizon dealing primarily, as I said, with the PEG fees as well as with the subscriber fees. And just so you're aware, the subscriber fee is basically 5% of gross revenue. Gross revenue is defined as the revenue from the subscribers that are here. Just so the board is aware, with regard to Verizon, their high water mark on the franchise fee was in 2017 when it was $161,468.61. This past year, it was $136,151.98. And as Dale has said, every year she actually has to redo the numbers because the income coming in from our cable franchises is in fact going down because the number of subscribers is going down. So I welcome any questions from the board.
All right, so the short of this is 5 years, $29,000 plus some boxes and some other.
As well as
Upgrades.
the franchise fee. The PEG fee is different than the franchise fee. They're
And
two
the
different
franchise
fees.
fee is what?
Franchise fee is 5% of the gross revenue based
Okay,
upon
got
number of
it.
subscribers.
And
Last
that's
year,
not
that
it.
was $136,151.98.
Got it. Okay, comments or questions, please? Anybody? Everybody okay with this? Do you have a question? No.
Yes,
Okay,
sir.
So it all made sense to me. It did, the only question I had was with the upcoming changes to the community center. Would there be any, we're doing some renovations there. Is there anything that needs?
There
to be
are,
baked in?
if it stays essentially where it is, then there is no charge.
Okay.
There are provisions in there that if we were moving things, there would be a charge. But in that event, Verizon would let us know the charge in advance of anything that had to be done.
That was the only question, just trying to link it to stuff.
And as I said, in a couple of months, I expect we'll be coming back for Cablevision. There are more Cablevision subscribers than there are Verizon subscribers, just in comparison, just so you know, last year, Cablevision's franchise fees were $212,970. So you can see the difference there in terms of numbers. But
interesting.
if the board's okay, we could have a resolution next week calling for the public hearing.
Okay, so I'm getting a sense of yes from everybody.
Okay, wonderful.
And the
Thank you.
resolution is
Yeah.
to call for a public meeting.
Call for the public hearing, then the
Okay.
public hearing would be 2 weeks thereafter,
Right.
and we go
Okay.
from there. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thanks, Stuart, for everything.
Got
Thanks.
it.
I'd like to invite Valerie Monastra up. So we've been working on updating our affordable housing policy rules and regulations. for presentation to the board, and we have been working with IFCA Housing Network to address some of the things that we've learned in the years that we've been doing this program, largely very, very successfully, but occasionally we have some hiccups. So Valerie can take through in detail, but really we're looking to create options for owners to give them more control over who they rent to while still making sure that they're renting it appropriately and affordably. We're also looking, we also are sensitive because the money that had been allocated to this affordable housing fund that the village has been using is run out. And at this point, one of the other issues that we'd like to talk about is, we have some thoughts on recommendations that maybe put more responsibility on owners to pay for this service. Or, there's different things that we can and again, that's why we created different options. So one, the owner has more control over it, and they're going just to check that, the program is in compliance. And one is they can contract IFCA to do it in its entirety, similar to how they've been doing it all along. But we can discuss all these options, and Valerie will go through the details with you, but it is something we've given considerable amount of attention to, and it is a little bit wonky and complicated, but we'll try to streamline it for the purposes of this meeting.
Sure. So let me just give you a little background. So a few months ago, we started, and I say we, Stuart, Karen, Maddie, myself, and then we started also talking to IFCA. We went through basically, we realized the last time any of this has really been updated has been like probably 10, 15 years, about 10 years ago, something like that. So we thought it'd probably be good to take a look at the rules and regulations, and also the affordable housing law, and update it in accordance with current best practices, as well as how the program is actually being administered at this point in time. So part of the documents that you received were just housekeeping revisions to the affordable housing law. It does not replace or doesn't change any of the overall structure of the program. It's still 10% of, your full housing units, anything but of 6 units or above. The rules and regulations, the amendments that we're proposing for that really, again, just reflect currently your current administration process and some of the proposed changes that we'd like to talk to the board about tonight. So typically right now in your current administration process, because you had funding in place, IFCA would help all affordable housing landlords with all affordable housing units. These are ones that are part of your, what we're going to call your inclusionary zoning, which means basically this is not your typical affordable housing development where 100% of the units are affordable housing and they're going under some sort of state or federal program. These are developments that in which, somebody develops 20 units of market rate housing, two of those units to 10% would need to be affordable and under the terms of the village's affordable housing program. So in the past, IFCA would identify potential tenants, work with the landlords, and then also do recertifications. And the village would contract with IFCA to do that work. We are now, there has been some expressed interest by some landlords to be able to potentially look for their own tenants. And this kind of comes at a fortuitous time where the affordable housing the fund is running low, and we need to kind of look at how the village wants to proceed. So we came up with almost like a 2-track system. The first track would be that the landlords would be able to select their own tenants. And if they select their own tenants, they have to provide IFCA certain documentation to just verify that the tenant one meets the income requirements, and that the landlord is actually only is collecting only 30% of their gross household income as part of the rent, so that they have to confirm that so that IFCA has to confirm that the landlord is getting the correct rent from the tenant and that the tenant meets the affordable housing requirements. That would be, right now, that would be a cost of basically $600 per unit. And this
To
would,
whom?
this would be to IFCA. That would be the cost of the,
Who's paying the 600?
the landlord.
You're passing the costs per unit to landlords.
That's correct. The other option, and we can talk about both things, right? We can talk about the paths and then we can also talk about the costs. The other option would be for if for some reason a tenant does not want to select, does not want to seek their own, I mean, excuse me, if the landlord does not want to seek their own tenant, then IFCA could do similar to what they're undertaking now, which was that they would, find a tenant for the landlord. And this tenant would meet the qualifications of the Village's Affordable Housing Program. That would come at a cost at $1,150 per unit. Now,
Basically, we're.
that's correct.
So, just to be clear, the cost.
Can you turn your microphone on, please?
Sorry about that, Jamie.
Thank you.
I think it's important that it's providing the landlord with the ability to do something. Again, it was funded by the village because we had an allocation of funding that was provided by, from the private sector. In the absence of having that fund, that's really how, so it's not truly like we're passing on the cost. It's just a cost we no longer have the funding to absorb.
Right. And just so that the board knows, I looked today and I believe you have about 52 affordable housing units currently. So, and then there's a couple more coming in the set aside program. Yes. So we're not talking about just a handful of units at this point, and more will be part of this program as the village continues to rehab or redevelop. So, so those are the two options that we are seeking, your input on. We can talk about the two different options and then also the overall costs. And then, of course, every year there would be some sort of recertification process so that to confirm that, yes, the tenants still meet those income requirements. And that would come at a cost of the $600.
Is that a year?
Yes, for recertification.
So if
for each
somebody
unit.
moves into an apartment and moves out 6 months later and the landlord gets a new tenant, do they have to pay 600 or 1,200?
If they get a new tenant, it'd be 600.
Every certification is and that's the.
Mayors, if in fact it's a new tenant and they want to use IFCA, it would be.
Wait, then it would be 1,000, yes. If they choose, oh yeah, sorry.
No, I just want to sort of make the distinction, and I think the point that the mayor is making is a good one, that if somebody doesn't live out their entire lease agreement because they decide it's not for them or they want to go someplace else, every new tenant triggers that charge, whether it be the 600 or the 1,000. And the way that we sort of set it up is two different paths. One is like sort of an auditing function, some hand holding. The other is one-stop shopping. We'll do the whole thing for you. We'll bring the person to you. We'll get it done. So that's sort of the way that we've sort of been thinking about it, is those two separate paths. And this took an awful lot of work to make it this far. It sounds kind of simple, not so.
So, and the charges are based on quotes we got from IFCA, which replicate, really aren't vastly different from what they've been charging us all. So, it is, would be, something that we'd have to, talk about how we would want to do that for people who've been in this program a long time, who, have had the benefit of it being paid for. And do we want to, ease into that or create a grace period or offset that cost in some way in the short term? But it is something that, we've talked about in the past, that we really need the board's direction on how they want to move going forward, as the cost is significant. And we know, again, we no longer have that pool of funding available.
Where did the pool come from?
Came from Ginsburg. It was an affordable housing trust, if you will, that he provided as part of the Harbor Square development. So, yes, separate from the Downtown Development Fund, yes.
Yep. Well, I have so
So-
many questions. I don't know where to start.
So I'll start with a simple question for me, which is recognizing that we're talking about both a financial decision as well as an administrative decision. Is there a bigger problem to solve for? So if we were to try to say, hey, let's try to save as much money as possible, go with the landlord option, it's the cheaper option, and money is the priority for us, or is it the administrative burden involved?
I would say it's both to a degree. So, all these programs administration, the devil's in the detail. And to be perfectly honest, from our research, it depends on where you are, but some of these programs are vetted differently in different communities to different standards. And, it's not really clear that enforcements and things like that are underway. There's no consistent way of doing it, let me put it this way, although most of the communities in Westchester do have some sort of set aside policy. Ossining has been very diligent in doing this. And I can personally attest to the people who are qualified by IFCA meet those requirements. It usually works out very successfully. In the nearly 20 years that the program's been running, there have been very little issues. But it is a sizable amount of work to do the qualifications, and there's a lot of paperwork that's reviewed. There's a lot of documentation that's reviewed in order to qualify somebody and make sure that you are running the program as you have told people you were going to be running it. It's a little bit of both. It's not something that we could do. We would still have to contract with somebody else to do it. We don't have the staff manpower to do it internally. There is a cost of doing this to the property owners.
Thank you. With the landlord option, you mentioned that there are some landlords that have tenants that they are interested in. Is that potentially problematic in some way?
No, I mean, we just had one, went through our first, I guess, landlord option because at 90 South Highland Avenue, they were interested, they found a tenant, they wanted that tenant to particularly go into the unit, and IFCA worked with them to make sure that the tenant, yes, indeed, met the requirements. And I believe they've moved in since then.
So that's, I think, the part that we spend the most time on.
Right.
And we really went back and forth. So IFCA has a waiting list that they have, and they, have had that waiting list for a long time. And, you're on the waiting list, and they basically use that list for their own properties as well as the set aside. The idea is to provide as much affordability to people who need it. And sometimes people who need affordability aren't necessarily on waiting lists, whether it's for housing voucher program or whether it's for other programs, for various different reasons. The other issue that we have is, and this isn't really spelled out, it's something we would articulate going forward for people who, if they want to go with IFCA choosing somebody. If you occasionally, and it happens very rarely, but occasionally you get a tenant that is a bad tenant, and evicting a tenant is an enormously time-consuming and expensive process. And there have been concerns about, well, you're making me take this tenant. And it's usually the smaller, the smaller sort of mom and pop buildings with maybe one unit. And now, because you didn't let me select my tenant, I now have this problem, and it's going to cost me, and we were talking about tens of thousands of dollars in lost rent revenue, legal fees, and sometimes other things, people, other people in the building being affected. So that's a legitimate issue. And in weighing the option of allowing people to have more discretion, we would still check it. They would still have to meet certain criteria, but it does also allow for a greater reach, if you will. So while, there's, the idea is if somebody needs an apartment and somebody is willing to rent to them because they feel comfortable with it and they needed the apartment anyway, and they meet all the criteria, that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Mhm.
And not everybody knows to go on IFCA's list or even knows what IFCA is, or, so it is just another way to reach more people.
Last question for me for now is of the qualifications that tenants need to meet in order to qualify for this, is being documented one of them, like citizenship or having a green card, some sort of documentation status?
No, so we went through with IFCA very carefully as to the documentation, and also because we recognize that, certain people work, sometimes different, they might not necessarily have a lot of like pay stubs and stuff like that, or they have other different means. So we do have, as part of the verification requirements, you can have like what we're calling, like, it's not necessarily self-verification, but it's specifically different acceptable resources, and that's based on the Housing Choice Voucher Program guidelines. So we do have an option so that if somebody doesn't happen to have all their tax documents or their pay stubs and stuff like that, there are other alternatives to be able to demonstrate their income.
Thank you.
Got it? Anybody else?
For now.
I will say with I wanted to note with the criteria, we did spend a lot of time with IFCA. We've also it's a similar criteria that we've been working with those of the ETPA opt-out. So there's been a lot of vetting and making sure that we have the appropriate criteria, so it's not too much, but then it's also just the appropriate amount of documentation to be able to verify things.
Huh?
So just don't be, from a clarification standpoint, that this process would only apply to the 52 units that you're talking about.
That's correct.
So,
And
and
forward, right.
whatever incrementally gets added. So
Correct.
this process, I assume that, for example, for 30 Water Street, there's going to be some income verification process, but that would not fall under all of
That's
this.
30
correct. It
30
went
Water
forward.
Street is completely different.
Yeah.
So that's an all affordable building. They actually are working with IFCA directly they'll typically have a lottery, similar for 78, both 30 Water Street and I'm sorry, not 78, McWestern on Croton Avenue have elected, they want to support local, and they have already formed their own private agreements with IFCA on those properties, but it's completely different. Those buildings also may be subject to other, I think it's important to understand where issues of citizenship things usually are tied to government funded programs. If there's no, and this is an important, it's an important point for the board too. Once you're using taxpayer dollars or government dollars for a program, there may be more question about who's eligible. In this case, it's the landlord who's making, who would be paying, and therefore the landlord has latitude to make that decision. And that's really typically what triggers any sort of restriction, is based on the path of government funding.
Okay. So I'm currently of the 52, how many properties is it? And like roughly how many different owners?
How many
So you
different
kind of
owners?
understand the impact of the
I
transition.
would say over 10.
Yeah, well over
Yeah.
10.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
there's-
have two big properties that take up about 30 of the units, and then the rest of them are like 1 to 2 units in much smaller buildings.
Yeah, maybe close to 15 now at this point. something like
Yeah,
that.
probably.
Yeah, I have the list. I can send them to you. I can send
That'd be,
them to
I'm just trying to get a sense of the scope of how complex a transition is going to be in terms of having conversations with the, because this is different than it used to be.
Right.
You mentioned that, right? So they're going to now be paying for a service that used to be free. in
Yes,
some
we were talking about having a transition of like potentially like sending out letters to the different, property owners, and then giving like a transition period, right? So it wouldn't be just tomorrow. There would be like a transition period that we'd work out with the board. So they have time to make their decision, also decide how they want to proceed with, whether they want to go path A or path B with new tenants as well.
Okay.
They
To-
could also, and again, it's the issue of verifying some of these My guess is the larger buildings will have, and many of them do have the capacity to do this on their own. So for the larger buildings where you would have the most cost, they may say, okay, we're going to take it in-house. Our experience is though, that needs to be audited, so they would have to pay for the audit, because if you don't audit it.
Oh, that's the $600 fee. right?
$600?
That's
Yeah.
the $600 fee is basically a
Yeah,
dollar fee.
so they would, and I would think that some of the larger properties might elect to do that. Some of the smaller ones may do that too. But again, it's the auditing function that's really the most critical function.
And, okay, so that's helpful. So can I comment on the proposed changes to the law as well at this point? Okay, so I was reading through it, like I didn't see what happens if they don't recertify necessarily in the changes to the law.
In terms of violations.
Yeah, can you talk us through a little bit? Because, I can see, oh yeah, sure, I'll self-certify, and maybe they
Tracking
don't, or
people
maybe they
down and,
don't, and like from that perspective, because that feels like a bit of a burden from internally from a village perspective.
Right, so I think we don't, and I'll also have Stuart weigh in, but right now, we don't really have like violation provisions as part of part of the law.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking, because I
Yeah.
didn't see that.
And we can work those in. We just have not, truthfully, it's a good thing. We haven't had any issues, and everybody has in compliance, and everybody knows that's part of their site plan approval process. And so I think to some extent, because it's part of their site plan approval process, you do have that trigger under like violating your site plan, but we could put in specific violations.
We would likely, and I mean, this is helpful, like, I think getting some board direction will help us inform that process too. When you're not charging for it, it's easier, compliance is obviously a lot easier. That said, we still have, we do have issues from time to time. As we put more onus on, if we decide to put more onus on the landlords, then the issue is, how do, what are the triggers? And one of the challenges with all of the stuff is enforcement always is challenging.
Yep.
So we can look at that more carefully. What we have found is there aren't a lot of exemplary role models out there based on the popularity of this program.
One of the difficulties we would have, because we've had this in other circumstances, is that if, for example, a tenant does not provide the documentation but is already in the apartment, we as a village, we can't bring an eviction proceeding. It's not our tenant. We don't have the ability to do that. The landlord has to do it. Now, the landlord has often looked to us to basically do that. And we've said, it's not our role. We can't do that. So sometimes the landlord would say, well, could you do an inspection of the apartment? Because I'm sure you'll find violations. Well, no, we just can't walk in and do that. I do think, Trustee Yost, that if it changes from the village paying to the landlord paying, there are things that can be done. One, if they don't pay, let's say they're vetted, but they haven't paid, that money can go onto the tax bill, which is what we do in other circumstances. I think the more significant question is, what do you do if you have a tenant who does not provide they're already in the unit, but they are now not providing you the tax returns, so they're not providing. That's something I think, has to be looked at, because that's a different circumstance. As I said, when we've had that in other situations with other buildings, the landlord is ultimately forced to bring an eviction proceeding, because that's the only way to get the tenant out, because we do not have the ability to do that. They're not our tenant. So, but I think it is something we can look at to put some, teeth, be it either get the money back through, taxes. Although I'm assuming that the way it's going to be presented is they're going to have to pay before they can, or if IFCA going to act. So in other words, that's what I'm saying. So if IFCA says they haven't gotten it, but I think it's more in terms of the paperwork is not there, particularly if you have a tenant who's already in sight and is there. What do you do on a recert if they just say, I'm not going to give you my tax returns, or I'm going to be 4 months late, or whatever?
Or, and I mean, I did see the provision in where where they need to make it, if the landlord does it, they need to make the documentation available. And,
Sure.
so that's, visible, right,
Right.
from that perspective. But I think the other one is, if they don't, if the landlord isn't providing documentation, or if there's not some proof that, the landlord chooses we're going to take care of it option.
Right.
And, I believe like the intent is that the properties stay affordable. And so what if, we get to the point where, somebody decides to stop providing that
Well,
documentation and we don't know.
there
that it's
isn't,
affordable.
there is an availability to the village in that, and that is that as part of the certificate of occupancy, before they get it, we have to enter into a restrictive covenant with the owner, which is that this unit will be XYZ. If they don't do that, in other words, if, let's say, we have 10 units, one has to be affordable, and you know what? We're going to give all 10 market rate. We don't care what we said. We can sue on the restrictive covenant that they're in breach of that, and then we can force him to effectively make one of those units. Because as Valerie pointed out, that's not only in the planning board resolution, it's an actual document. We've just done one recently, where and that runs with the land. So it's not just the one owner, that's going to go, I think we do it for 99 years in the village.
Yeah.
So it's there. So if in fact we had an owner who basically said, I'll sign the piece of paper, I'll tell you it's going to be one, but you know what? I'm just going to rent the whole building out and it doesn't matter. We would have an ability to bring an action against that person for violating that covenant, because that was part of his, and he's also then in violation of his site plan. So it creates a whole pack of trouble for that person, but we can tighten it up within chapter 62.
To answer your question more directly, Trustee Yost, Jamie was kind enough to get this information from my desk. There are 2 property owners that have 10 units or more in the program, and then there are 7 property owners who have 3 or fewer.
So less than 10 owners, really, currently.
Trustee Yost, I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Is your microphone on?
No, I was leaning back, sorry.
I'm sorry. Thank you.
Nope, you're good. So, okay.
Bob? Anything? Okay, so first of all, I think it's not just a transition in timing. There's gonna have to be some way of also financially, because if you want to keep decent landlords and you want them to participate and not pass these costs onto the other tenants who are not in the program, there has to be somewhat, especially for the 2 larger ones, somewhat of a transition that's also financial. It has to be something, because you're going from, we didn't pay, to now they have to pay all of these
Well,
costs.
essentially, one of the landlords has been paying the entire time for everybody. So like
Okay.
so just, again, it's not really, yeah. I mean, essentially Ginsburg has paid for the entire program in its entirety. So
That's one way of
yeah.
looking at it. From the other landlord's point of view, so my goal is that all parties concerned are treated well, so that all parties concerned behave well. So not all tenants are angels, and we said lots of things to try to alleviate that. And not all landlords are bad. We have some good landlords, right, who have lived here a long time and done a lot of stuff here. We want to keep them in good straits. It doesn't matter who's paid. It hasn't been them. It's been a luxury housing where the average rent is far greater than what most of the, so it doesn't matter. The point is they haven't been paying it. And I always believe in some transition, because I think it's fair. And then my goal is that the decent landlords, of which we do have, we often talk about landlords like they're all bad. It's just not true. It's all of a sudden a heavy hit, especially I think for the 2 larger ones, even though they probably have more capacity, it works both ways. So I'd like to see some sort of a plan personally that alleviates some of that, regardless of who's been paying. I'm not saying the village should pick up the whole tab. The other question we're going to have to ask ourselves is, as people develop, so we have 52 now, right? And then you said, except for what's coming in the future. How much do we have in the future? We've got 30 water, doesn't qualify. the old nursery doesn't qualify. If we go market rate in a few years, they'll have 10%. Those are big developers, right? So what would prevent us from doing what we did with Ginsburg, that the bigger developers should do some set aside money as well? I mean, they would have to pay for their 10%, these fees,
I mean,
correct?
I mean, there's different ways to look at it. And I think a lot of it, there's a lot of variables right now. So depending on what type of public benefit you want to get in exchange for, these would be in exchange for pilots. So, depending on what public benefits you get, and I think it's hard to make that determination at this point because it is specific to a developer and specific to.
Right, so one by
what you
one
want.
basis, right?
So, you may or may not decide that that's where you want the emphasis of the public benefit to be when we get there. We can look in parallel of developing pilot policies that could take some of that into consideration in the
Okay.
longer term, but those are, not turnkey. I think, we're definitely supportive of a transition period. And really this is to get some of the sense, a sense from the board of where they're leaning and, an idea of a way we can do this in, Mayor, to your point, making sure that we're encouraging people to continue to run the program well, without overburdening anybody. But also making sure, that we can do the verification. It's a lot of work. So, making sure that it's done appropriately. So, a transition period can be worked out in different ways.
Okay, I think that's actually what we're saying.
Yeah, so,
So,
but some direction, I think, from the board on what they're thinking of generally timing and how that might work
Okay.
from a board position.
so it's 52 units right now. In the next 2 years, I'm not imagining a lot more than that, because how many are you imagining?
Well, we have
What's in the pipeline?
70, yeah, two down at two,
So that's 2,
right.
78.
Those are the two that we have right now that are coming.
Probably
else?
have,
There's supposed to be one, I think one more for Teen Church if they move forward with that.
and then if it'll probably be a little bit more than 2 years, but Market Square would be another 10.
Right, and I think the Main Street, where the Midas building is, they're potentially pending. That might be
So
coming,
that would be
maybe a
like
few more,
3,
yeah,
maybe. I would say, so
maybe,
2,
yeah.
2.
probably.
Okay, so we're looking at 52, 50, 57, I guess, and maybe 10 in Market Square, which is more than 2 years out. All right, it's not a huge number.
No.
It just concentrated in 2 or 3, right? So I would recommend, I don't know exactly what anybody had in mind. I mean, it's gotta be, is there a recommendation for a time and a dollar amount?
So, I think for time, we can look for maybe starting and like letting people know within like the next 6 months or something like that. We can reach out and we can start again, when I say 6 months, not 6 months from this date, but 6 months once we have everything ready to go in terms of, notifications.
So we're going into May, so it sounds like effective January 1, 2026. I
Yeah.
mean, it just, it's 6 months and we're like in May,
Yeah,
right? Okay, so that's fine. And if you can come back with a recommendation for me just on an idea, because I don't have one in my head. I just know oftentimes things just don't feel right. When we had huge discussions about ETPA, the biggest one was you're punishing everybody
right.
because people will make money. So now the other tenants will have to pay more money. So to save 2 units, right, and move this money, 10 other people are going to pay more to make up for this money. They'll just increase their rents. The whole thing is a big balancing act, right? And the fairness to both tenants, the affordable, the market rate in the same building, and then the landlord who's also decent landlords. Not that they're all decent, but let's assume that we're aiming for the decent ones, that we're not being punitive here and punishing, because the money will be moved somewhere. Most likely to other tenants or services that will be given up, right? I mean, that's what's gonna happen. So we don't want that, right? We want good services. We want clean fronts. We want supers where supers exist, not typically what happens. Super's there 12 hours, all of a sudden the super's only there 6 hours a day and all of a sudden they're not there. So we, like, the more we can figure out a way to balance, and I'm sure this was very complicated, so I'm not questioning that. I think the better this would be.
Yeah.
Fairness to everybody. Is the IFCA number locked in? For how long are these numbers locked in? Is it a contract with the
Well,
village, with the
that's what they're
whatever?
recommending. So everything's
Okay.
subject to negotiation.
Okay,
So there's a couple of ways that we could do this. I think it would be a good time now for us to start reaching out to, starting with the larger properties and, working our way down to start saying this is something that we're going to have to, start doing. I think to some people, there may be an advantage that they have an option now that they can have more latitude, because one of the biggest complaints we get from pretty much everybody is, I typically vet my own tenants, and that's not what happens in this program. So
Right.
there is an element of, okay, you get to do that now, but it's going to cost you a little bit more because we're not, that
it's not
seems-
being
I
subsidized.
think
Yeah.
positioning it that way also makes it, there is a value add in a sense that you do give more control to the landlords. So I think that all of this is subject to discussion. And right now, to be honest, there are a few other organizations in the county that do this type of thing. And if a landlord wanted to say, well, I'm going to do it myself, but I'm going to go with XYZ, whether it's West Hab or Chi or Housing Action Council, whoever else does it, and they get a better deal, then that's on IFCA too. So, I think that there's ways that we can do this.
Are they allowed to do that?
We can, look, I think from our
'Cause this doesn't
perspective,
say that
Right,
they're
that's
allowed to.
correct. I mean, and
we can make an I mean, I think it's hard to mandate. We can mandate that we want to use this one organization that we know and trust.
Mhm.
But there are other organizations that may or may not do it. I don't know that they would do it much more cheaply, but we really haven't explored that. If
So-
that was an option. Well, no, they would have to, if somebody else is doing it, they would have to do it to our standard. Like they would have to vet it and report back to us. So it would still be they'd still have to do it to our standard. They'd have to vet it. So it's, us having control of who's doing it obviously makes it easier. But I don't think that there would be a problem if we said, these are the specs that you have to.
Right, so look, we
Checks.
have fewer than 10, right? So it's like 9. So these are humans that you all know. I would suggest that also you could say, if you can do better with these, let us know, right? But we're choosing this because we know, right? We know that they serve the public the way they're supposed to. But if you think you can do better from a legitimate whatever, come and
We
talk
would
to
have
me.
to, from
you're
a
not dealing with
village
hundreds
approved
here.
agency to do it. We
Right.
have to approve.
So
the
you're not
agency.
like dealing with hundreds of possibilities here. You're
Right.
dealing, maybe they'll find one, and you have to look at that and say, yeah, sorry, this doesn't work, or it does.
We would
But
have
we're not gonna
we
make
would have to approve
rules for
the
that.
agency doing the vetting.
Yeah.
That would be the condition.
Okay. All right, I mean, that's some
Yeah, and we
direction,
can-
right? Did you
right.
get the direction you needed?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so if it's all right with the board, then we'd like to maybe have this, especially for the changes to the law and the rules and regulations, maybe have that start moving forward, and then we can come back with the final, I'm gonna say the
Transition plan.
Yeah, the
and,
transition plan and the the
Transition, it's
Final detail,
communications,
right.
It's like-
exactly. Okay.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for your input. Of all the many things that we're working on, this is probably one of the most complicated. So I do want to thank Valerie for her expertise. She was around when the village first initiated the program, and Maddie as well for, it was an enormous amount of detail, effort, and sometimes the things that don't seem like they would take as much time really take a lot of time to do well. And this is not easy stuff. So,
Could you tell me, out of the 40-something municipalities in Westchester County, how many do this 10% set aside?
I think for the most part at this point, all do. It varies on how many of them, how much enforcement is being done in the various municipalities. So some of the larger cities tend to have, like, they might have the in-house staff that oversees those because they have such robust programs. But then you also have smaller communities where they only have a couple affordable housing units. And at this point, they haven't really started focusing on enforcement of those programs.
But you think it's greater than 90% of municipalities?
Yeah, because
do
it's
with
all-
10%.
Yeah, because of
It's
the
virtually all.
And some have
lawsuit,
buyouts,
right?
right?
Yeah.
And some have buyouts, which we don't.
We do, and that's also part of the new lease. We are highlighting in the new lease packet that somebody could potentially do an affordable housing buyout if they so choose to.
No one's ever opted for that.
Right, nobody's ever opted
it's-
for it.
It's a high bar to be able to do that. So it doesn't you're not incentivized to buy
What's the cost? Do you know it off the top of your head?
We do.
$50,000 per unit.
Okay, so other municipalities don't have that high bar. They have a lower bar.
It's actually a number of them do have that high of bar because they really want to kind of encourage the development of the affordable housing units as opposed to just
Yeah,
buyouts.
the buyouts tend to be high because the desired goal is to have the affordable unit.
And yet municipalities have bought them out. There are 2 or 3 where people have bought them out at those high prices.
I'm sure,
Okay.
I'm sure there are, and
Okay.
and other ones have also negotiated like developing affordable housing units at different locations and
Right,
stuff
I
like
think
that.
that's probably the more common one. Okay,
All right.
great job, because this must have been a huge headache.
It was a little bit
Thank
of
you.
it was like
It was a
one of
team
those
effort.
mental puzzle challenges that
Yeah.
we talked
Yeah, I'm
about
sure
for
it's
many,
not
many,
done.
many times,
And
but
it also explains why I got calls from landlords in the past 2 days, because they must have read the agenda and realized this was on for tonight. So
that-
they do
that-
pay attention to this.
that's good. That's good. Well, we'll be reaching out as well. Our next topic is, as you recall, we had to do the state environmental quality review, for the multimodal transportation hub.
Mhm.
So Valerie has the report on that process, and I will turn it over to Valerie once again.
Okay, so so we are in the process of doing the final environmental review, which is basically you've already called called for notice of intent to be lead agency. The mayor, you signed an environmental assessment, part 1 of the environmental assessment form. So we are now at the part 2, part 3, which we're anticipating becoming a neg deck, which is a negative declaration, which means basically this project is not going to have a significant adverse impact. So it's not to say that there's no impacts, it's just the fact that there would be no significant adverse impact associated with this project. Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
it's like, it's anti-intuitive.
Right, the
Negative is
pause,
good.
right, if this board found that there was a potential to have a significant adverse impact, then most likely you would adopt a positive declaration. And then that would begin an environmental impact statement process. But this particular project, you are basically taking a surface parking lot and building a structure. There have been, as part of the environmental review, we did send out referrals and notification to the New York State Historic Recreation and Historic Preservation, and as well as Westchester County Department of Planning. And I wanted to just kind of touch base on a couple of comments that came back from Westchester County and then also from the Historic Preservation Office. So Paul Fraley is also on the call today because a couple of things that came up in terms of the Westchester County comments specifically deal with the stormwater management. They had one of their concerns was that the stormwater management from the site, they noted they would have a direct offlow from the garage into the village's drainage system. And they advised the village work to provide a means to treat the runoff on site wherever possible, especially as runoff may include pollutant materials from the parking garage that could flow into nearby Kilbrook. We encourage the installation of above-ground stormwater management measures such as rain gardens within landscaped areas or permeable paving surfaces where possible. And so I asked Paul to attend tonight to kind of talk a little bit about that because I believe there is clearly stormwater management taking place, but he can talk a little bit about some of the issues or with incorporating a lot of treatment for runoff.
Paul,
Thank you,
you're on.
Thank you, Valerie. So to answer the county, we replied that the impervious surface that exists there now doesn't increase when you put a garage there. There's a structure there, but it was negligible, if at all, the impervious surface. So what we tried to do, because it is the storm system there does discharge into the Kilbrook, which is tributary to the Hudson. We put 2 extra catch basins in line with before it discharges out onto Brandreth receiving line, which discharges into the Kilbrook. Those catch basins will act as measures where we can, like most catch basins, we can capture sediment and material that gets caught in the sump in those catch basins when we clean our catch basins every year. And we're trying to put as much green space around the garage as we can, but it is, as you know, a tight space between Leonard Street and then the structure itself. So we did what we could, but it really wasn't an appropriate place to place one of those swale rain gardens like we did on James Street and like we have included in the upcoming Spring Street streetscape project. We couldn't find the appropriate soils or location for one of those here. But again, with the negligible difference in impervious surface, there was no real requirement for any detention on site. And treatment is hopefully going to be improved a little bit with obviously maintenance of the garage area the same way we maintain the parking lot, but also with the additional catch basins that are going to be upstream of its connection point on Brandreth before discharge into the Kilbrook.
Okay, was there a second piece to that or just that?
No, so and then the other comments from the county really focus on commending the village for moving forward with this particular project. Also for commending that there's potential for the solar array to be included in the garage. And then they noted that, you know, if possible, provisions for electric vehicle parking capabilities within the parking garage should be considered, as well as just signage and information for people for e-bikes, especially along the Old Croton Aqueduct Trail. So for the most part, that was really the only one comment that I think would, you know, be a little bit more difficult to address completely with this particular project from the county.
So it's anti-intuitive to me, but I'm not an engineer. You have a 1-story now, right? You have a flat, impervious, parking lot, right? That drains somewhere now, but you're gonna have 4 stories of it. That doesn't create any more water. It's water, right? When it rains, doesn't matter if there's 4 stories or 1 flat parking lot is the argument for how much water drains off, and dirt and sediment and all that.
Well, for purposes of the impervious surfaces, yes.
I'm sorry, are there other purposes? I mean, isn't that all that matters?
That's it. I mean, if we were to if that was a park that was all green space and we were to create a parking lot there or a parking structure, we would obviously be introducing a lot more surface water to the collection system than we would be if there was a pervious surface there that could absorb the rainwater into the park area. That not being the case, we're just it's kind of what we have now is what we're going to have when we're done with respect to how much stormwater gets introduced into the system. We'll have some means of detection.
While anti-intuitive, that was an accurate statement. It's the same amount of water. Because
Correct.
right now there is a parking lot there.
Correct, but we're going to have a system within the structure itself and 2 additional catch basins prior to the street, which will act not only to help us to some extent with pre-treatment before it discharges into the Kilbrook, but it's also going to act as in some ways, a detention system because of the capacity within the structures will hold the water in place a little while before it continues on to the Kilbrook.
Anybody have questions or comments? Gentlemen? People on this side? All right, so I'm not an engineer, but it sounds like it's being looked at.
Yes, so
And
it is being looked at and we just wanted the board to be aware it is being looked at. It was a comment that was raised from the county, but there's limitations on how we can possibly address that particular comment.
okay,
The other comments we received were from the, basically the State Historic Preservation Office. And specifically, they had comments, and this deals with how the proposed structure would affect the historic district. So they had comments on the solar panels. They felt as they're portrayed in the plans are too prominent and will visually impact the historic district and the old Croton Aqueduct. And they recommended redesigning the canopy and allow to have multiple structures instead of one. And they provided an example of like what you would find in a parking lot where you have a canopy and then you have spaces because of you have the drive aisles and then you have another a solar canopy. I believe at this point, I mean, I think the solar panels are like a next phase. So that's something that we can, that the village could take into consideration in the next phase. The other thing is they recommended simplifying the upper and lower cornice and then to
I'm
submit
sorry, the upper and
lower
lower.
cornice, which is basically the trim. I'm gonna, layman's term, like the trim. Yes, and they recommended that, and they asked for a landscape plan that retains the existing vegetation and includes a vegetative screen buffer between the building and the old Croton Aqueduct. So we've submitted these comments to the architect that's working on this, the project, and they are putting together a response that we're gonna send back to SHPO. So
But we didn't want it simplified. We actually asked for it that way, didn't we? In the design?
Yeah, but their SHPO is saying that it's too ornate.
yes, more or less, that's what
So-
we're gathering.
I'm sorry, what is the legal?
I don't
standard
remember,
that they
I don't
have?
remember exactly what it looks like, but did they have the ability to change it like that?
Well, so this is the thing. So they're still doing their review and ultimately one as part of their review is there'd be no adverse impact to the historic district. So we have worked with them numerous times in the past. And if there are, like, for example, if you feel that if you feel like you like the design as is, we can go back to SHPO and even try to have a call with them to talk about that, right?
I
And
mean, how
to-
much, I would need to see some idea of how much you're even gonna see the parking garage from the historic district.
Yeah,
Wasn't,
yeah.
wasn't this was a concept and this was pre-wired, correct?
Oh,
Paul, wasn't this just a concept to have the solar up there? And we're gonna-
solar-
The infrastructure would be installed.
Yeah.
Yeah,
They're talking about those, they're talking about that, not the solar. This is the second item.
So what would you do
They're
instead?
having issues
Well, I
with.
guess that's up to the architect, but
What is it that they want them to do?
I don't know. That's the thing.
elevator?
Yeah,
like
Like-
that's the stair.
That's like,
tower, but
it's pretty simple already. It's like it's like a square nothing.
I mean,
It's
it's a lot
also a re-
smaller than the
oh.
historic buildings.
The benefit of actually understanding the site when they're doing this, right?
it's also a recommendation.
Right. It is technically a recommendation. So we could go back to them and say, we don't want to change the design.
Yeah.
And that we feel, and we could work with the architect to actually have like a little bit of a justification as to why they feel
Yeah.
the design is appropriate. And then the landscaping plan is the last thing that they asked for, which I believe we submitted all the plans, but we'll take a look and resubmit anything else that they're looking for. So hopefully we'll get this wrapped up soon. We can, and I talked to Stuart, we could potentially, because I know you're looking to go out to bid soon on this project, we could potentially move forward with a negative declaration, just acknowledging the historic preservation's comments and that we'd be working with them to satisfy the remaining comments, which are really to a larger extent minor, because because I think all of them are easily adjustable.
Like, is this working?
Yeah. you're
Like I
on.
said, well, Paul, one of those has to be for the elevator, correct? At least. And then the other one's probably just matching, or it's another staircase.
Yeah.
And it aesthetically
Again,
match.
just correct, but just to give a, I think it's worth noting that I don't believe there was any calls made to us to discuss the design, or maybe there wasn't even a site visit. It was just a recommendation based on their knowledge and the drawings and their recommendations. And that's the extent of it. And it's really the same thing they did with the landscaping plan. It would be nice if it was appropriate to have a buffer from just a regular parking structure, but this is not. This is a multimodal facility, and the main aspect which makes it multimodal is the e-bike appendage that we have on the east side of the structure that is adjacent to the aqueduct trail is really our attracting component to it for everything else except the cars. And that's really that's a big point of the garage. It's also the main reason we got the grant. So we're not inclined to have a vegetative buffer with the old Croton Aqueduct. The old Croton Aqueduct is more of our gateway to that e-bike facility. So, that's why we have what we have there. So again, it's good recommendations if you're looking at it with no background knowledge of how we got the
Not
grant.
looking at what's around it. And also I think more vegetation, not so much necessarily where it is what we've talked about all along.
Right.
But where it's appropriate. The whole
Right.
idea is to build a park-like thing, so it's not all concrete, which I think, at least the pictures we've looked at are like, we've been told there's going to be lots of green. So I'm expecting lots of green of different magnitude.
There
But-
is green. There's a lot of green on the perimeter, and I can tell you that now that the secret process is over, and I don't know if you've been back there, but there was some activity.
It's not over.
We're trying to make it over.
Yeah.
So. However.
We did start the tree removals to facilitate the utility poles to get relocated. And once the secret process is closed, we're going to commence with the rest of the tree work to remove only the trees that are necessary for the structure. I know we're maintaining the trees closer to the actual arch where we can. And we're also maintaining the trees along the where it's adjacent to Brandreth. But the tree,
At the end of all this, aren't we?
Yes.
excuse me?
We're planting trees at the end of this.
Yes, there's also a planting plan, but I mean, the trees that we're removing that are there now.
Stood.
Yeah, so what we can do is we can go back to the Historic Preservation Office, and I'll work with Reggie to provide additional information, and Maddie to provide additional information so that we can justify the reasonings behind the design, and then hopefully this will they'll be able to issue their no adverse impact letter.
And they were nice. They said the e-bike thing is a big plus. They understood that, the environmental impact of that and the EV stuff. So that's good.
Yes.
Got some pluses there.
Yes.
All right.
So
next.
that's it. Those are the rest of your comments. The EAC reviewed the application and they felt that it was consistent with the LWRP. So we should be ready to finish this environmental review process.
And the historic board, this is in the historic district? No, it's on the border.
Behind it.
It's outside of it. Okay, it's outside of it. All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Next. Is Valerie up again or?
No.
No, we're releasing
What?
Valerie for this
Only
evening.
an hour with Valerie? What?
We definitely get our money's worth here.
All right, next.
Project Mover.
Okay.
So we are incorporating some new sites for our bike hubs, bike stations. And we will need some site agreements for these with Project Mover and our provider, and I will turn that over to Corporation Counsel and Maddie and Paul are also here to weigh in as well on the process.
Okay, I'm primarily here for the license agreement part of our show. The, in order to get this in place by the 21st of April, we need to have a signed license agreement.
Okay.
I have the license agreement that they sent around, they meaning Project Mover. I've sent some comments to the Project Mover folks. I've not heard back. It's fairly similar to the agreement from last year. There are just a couple of points I wanted to go over with the board, just so find out basically their comfort zone with it or with these particular sections. One of the things that would be in the new agreement is that they want to have a point person basically from the village to deal with all the issues relating to location. The specific language they put in there is that during the launch of the bike share system, this person will be the primary point of contact for the launch team and will facilitate any and all decision-making on the municipality's side. Decisions communicated by this person to Drop, meaning Drop Mobility, will be deemed by Drop to be the official decisions of the municipality, and Drop can act upon them as such. This person will also have decision-making authority for the location of future bike share infrastructure to ensure improvements to the system don't require elevation to, in this case, the Board of Trustees. So what they're looking for is essentially a point person to do that. That was not in last year's agreement. So I bring it to you because I know last year there was a lot of discussion about locations and who, things like that. And we've had discussions already this year about the 3 new locations that will be there. So I did want the board to be made aware of that language. And there's a similar provision towards the end of the agreement that will say now, that now says, well, let me back up. The prior agreement said that no bike share station deactivation, deinstallation, and reinstallation may be performed without the village's prior approval. That language is not in this year's agreement. So basically the ability would be that Drop could say that particular station's not working. We're just going to take it offline. We don't need your point person to essentially, get involved, with there. Also in the old agreement, it said Drop may not relocate any underperforming station to another village property or within another village right of way without approval from the Board of Trustees via resolution. Some of you may remember we wanted that and got that put in. That language was taken out in the 27. So essentially, they'd have a point person from the village who'd be making the decisions. And in terms of deactivation and things like that, it would be a decision made by Drop. There would be no board input. I again just want the board to be aware of this. I have indicated to the people at Drop Mobility, my counterpart dealing with the agreement, that I was going to discuss these particular issues with the board. I raised some questions with Drop Mobility itself that I have not heard back on, but these were the 2 I wanted the board to be made aware of because they are changes from before. So that's my story.
Okay, thank you. Any comments or questions? I have a couple.
Yeah.
I'm gonna let Bob
So,
go first.
they want a point person to put them there. They don't want a point person to take it out, but they're gonna move it somewhere else. The point person's gonna be involved again, correct?
It does, at one point, it does say that the person will have decision-making authority for the location of future bike share instructions. But they do put in specifically that with regard to deactivation or deinstallation, it'll be performed essentially without the village's approval. So it's kind of, as I said, that was in the old agreement, that's now taken out. So essentially, the village would not have to give prior approval to what they're doing,
To take it out.
to take it out.
They gotta let us know they're taking it out.
It says here, well, you'll know, but you may know after the fact.
So, but back to my original comment, if they want to move it to another location, they're gonna need the point person.
They would need a point person at that point. That's correct. So it's a little,
Sounds a little,
cart before horse type thing.
yeah,
But I think the idea is to have what they want to avoid, it appears, is they want to be able to go to someone, be it Paul, be it Maddie, whomever, to say, we want to it's not doing well on the west side of the tracks. We'd like to move it further down Westerly Road. Are you okay with that? And, the person could say, okay, do that.
right.
Rather than coming back, assuming that it's obviously village-owned property. If it's private property, it's a different story. They're gonna have to get an agreement.
Basically, instead of coming back to us for a new location, the point person would handle it.
That's what they're basically looking to do.
Okay.
I would say.
That's
think
all I
that's
have.
the fair thing.
And who's this point person? We don't know.
Well, I'm sort of leaving staff here. Who that would be. I will know it will not be Corporation Council.
I was gonna say, not too many options.
Not a.
Who didn't come to work today?
Any other questions?
Someone doesn't have their microphone on, sorry.
I didn't say anything yet.
It was probably me.
Could you read the second change again, please?
Sure. I'll read my whole bullet. The 2024 agreement notes, drop shall perform bike share station deactivation, deinstallation, and reinstallation to accommodate changing conditions as instructed by the village. No bike share station deactivation, deinstallation, and reinstallation may be performed without the village's prior written approval. That bolded language was taken out. So the bolded language was that the no bike share station deactivation can be done without the village's approval. Also, the July 24 agreement included that drop may not relocate any underperforming bike share stations to another village property or within another village right-of-way without approval from the Board of Trustees via resolution. That also was dropped.
Got it. And was there anything else? Okay.
So that was dropped. And what was, as I said, what was put in was with regard to the point person.
I'm still thinking.
Anybody on this side? And then I'll go.
A question that may or not be related. I've been seeing around town, these fluorescent yellow signs go up that say share the road and they have a bicycle on. Is that part of Project Mover? It is, okay. I had a feeling.
It's so funny. I asked Paul that question yesterday because I've noticed the same thing, especially right outside the brewery when I was there the other day. All of a sudden there's a
There's
sign. on-
like 4 of them right near my.
Yeah.
house.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was part, Paul reminded me of our agreement. Okay, so I have an issue here, which is that if this were regular business, I have no issues with what they're asking for. So in 2-3 years, they're welcome to have this. Right now, this project is on our brand. It's on our backs. We're the ones pushing it. We're the ones that are out there. It's an outstanding project that the village board has been very involved with. We're still an incubator for them. So I'm not willing to give up, especially where it goes and when it gets taken out, because I don't want it taken out from an area that hasn't had enough time for adjustment. I don't want it taken out from a very congested area that may be a little bit lower income because people haven't adjusted to it. And we haven't learned. The whole purpose here is that we're part of selling this whole project to 5 or 6 other municipalities. And it's our brand in front of it. Nobody has ever heard of these companies. It's us. And I think the board should be involved in decisions because we know this community better than they do. I understand that they're going to look at the GPS and say, oh, this isn't performing, this is underperforming. And that's a good business model. And in a couple of years when they're in other municipalities, I'm good with that because it's taken off. But I'm not okay with it yet because I think it's important that the board be not only informed but make decisions. And this whole point person thing, while I appreciate their efficiency model, it's not like they're paying our staff to do this, right? Are they taking money out of their pockets to pay someone to do this, to do more work? Our staff's not designed to be decision makers on this stuff. The whole point here is that we're an incubator for a project. So if this was Lime and this was a business and they said, we'll pay you X and we're all over the world and we'll do this, I'd say, okay, we agree to have your business model and that's fine. or the Verizon conversation we had earlier. But here, it's like they're giving more work to an individual on staff without paying for that person's time or their decisioning, which they then have to deal with. And on the flip side, they're taking the idea of the fact that we know our community better than they do. Because I don't see any issue with getting a call that says, these two things are not performing, may we move them? That's a phone call, right? So,
Presumably.
so they can do that with the board. We meet every week here. So I actually, as long as it's also under us as an incubator, I'm not okay with this, this particular aspect that Pat also asked about. It doesn't feel right, right? I can't even put my finger, it doesn't feel right. Right? I mean, that's what's bothering you.
Yeah, it is bothering me, and I understand that they want a little more freedom to do what they want to do. Were there any requests last year to move any of the equipment?
The only request last year was the one outside of Seatown, and it didn't get moved to a different location. It just had to get moved diminutively.
Within, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I would still, I agree. I agree with you, Mary. I do believe that we should still have a say in this, as it's, I agree. It's still a startup. We're still in the try and learn mode, and I still believe that we should have a say in sort of how things get around.
So,
And trying alternatives if the traffic at a particular location isn't quite what they think it needs to be. Let's have a conversation about why, and if there's something that can be done about that, as opposed to just pick it up and take it away.
so Stuart, what are the three new locations?
I will defer to the assistant village manager, who I know knows that.
Oh, I can help with that. So originally, we played a really fun game where we got to throw like darts at a board and say, this is where we think they should go. We had about 10 sites that we were floating, and then we were asked to narrow it down to 3. One of them is going to be Veterans Park. So DPW, Johnny on the mark, they already poured the concrete pad over by the playground area. So right when you come in, it's like probably about 100 feet in on the right-hand side. Another is at the Welcome to Ossining sign on North Highland Avenue, where the old Croton Aqueduct meets. We already have an easement from New York State to have the sign there, so now we'll also have a bike rack. And then the third one is on the west side of the train tracks. So the board might remember we got a $5,000 grant from Clean Energy Communities that we bought the green spirally bike racks. Right now there's green spirally bike rack there. That green one will be removed and put someplace else, and a Project Mover bike rack will be put in its place.
Thank you. So this is the first we've discussed the 3 new sites, correct? And how do we get approval to pour the concrete in Veterans Park if we didn't discuss this and we want to control this?
That's on me. I didn't realize that this was going to be a controversial
For staff
decision.
decisions, it wasn't Project Movers' decision, so we can.
No, I
we can
understand.
going
I'm not
forward-
saying it's their
He's
decision.
not saying that.
I'm not
I think
saying
what
that.
Bob,
To what the mayor's
Bob is
point-
saying, my point is moot because apparently without us,
Right.
you guys already made the
Well,
decision. So
The-
is that what
the-
you're saying? Like
the-
it wasn't necessary?
What I'm saying is, my first question was, this is
Right.
the first we're hearing about the 3 new sites. We've already got concrete poured on one of them and we haven't discussed it, but you want to keep control. I get that.
Yeah.
I'm a 50-50 on it.
But now it turns out.
But
we
now-
never asked in the first place.
Right.
Well, Let me just take a step back. So it's not that Project Mover chose a site and said, pour the cement there. We weighed in as staff. I'm happy to bring
That's
those
the difference.
discussions to the board if they would like before we actually pour the concrete in the future. The control issue, and this is not specific to Project Mover, it is an issue that comes up every time we do a public-private partnership. The burden is on the village and village staff to do the communications, whether it's a solar roof, whether it's, any of these public-private partnerships. When we're working with a private sector partner, the sensitivity about community engagement is usually non-existent. And they have their bottom line, and typically they're doing something, and there's a funding issue, and they didn't get the money they thought were, these are, things like on the back end that maybe a them problem, it's not really an us problem. So one of the things going forward, and I think this is a good discussion to have. Anything that happens with Project Mover for the foreseeable future, if there's a change, if there's an issue, no one's calling Drop Mobility. They're calling Maddie, they're calling me, they're calling Paul, and they're upset because this is positioned as a village project. It is something that we talk to our private sector partners all the time, but there is a disconnect in the public-private partnership, and I think this is the nuance. I understand you're in the private sector, you're losing money at the site. You don't want to go into 6 months of bureaucracy. On the other hand, you're not really owning the project. You're not branding the project. You're not doing the marketing for the project. We're doing all that. So that's the difference here. And, in this case, the board, the staff did have control. We're happy to share that, spread the love on that, but making sure that the village is responsible is really important in a public-private partnership, because no one will remember that there was a private in that partnership.
Right, so I think, to your point, it went on without us anyway. It's not necessarily good or bad. That said, then maybe what the least should say is that the same person who is making decisions about one end of the spectrum should make the decision on both. Not that they only make it in one instance and then Project Mover makes it in the second instance. That doesn't have to be the board, but it does have to be somebody on staff representing the village. In other words, the first part stays the same, but the second part where they can decide on their own where to move, where to take down all that is not on them either. It should be the same person who the village has appointed as the guru of e-bikes or something. Does that make sense? Is that where you're going?
Well,
Not the
yeah.
board.
No, it makes sense, but now at this point in time, I want us to know everything that's going on.
I'll take the hit on this, but I have to admit, there has also been, it's halfway through April, we got to get the bikes out on the road. So, I mean, overstepped, yes, probably. And for that, I apologize, but it's not out of disrespect, it's out of expediency. So
No, no.
I apologize again.
And I'm not saying that. Oh, I mean, it's April. If they had to wait till May, so be it. They wait till May, it comes to us. I'm not beating you up. Don't get me wrong. All right, but if they have to wait another month till it comes through our channels, then that's what it is.
Let's step back one step. What I'm interested in, aside from control, is that if we're gonna do one part, if we have somebody who says all of the communications, right? You wanna do X, you wanna do Y, you wanna do A, you wanna do B, that same person should also have everything else in that lease. It isn't just, they cherry pick what they want. I don't have particularly an issue as long as the staff says, hey, we're making some major changes. It was important, actually, Bob, that rolls out in April, because there's there's all this environmental stuff in April, and it just fits nicely with it. So it's not, I don't want a vendor who has no skin in the game, no branding on their own, to be in charge of taking things away. Putting things in is one issue. Taking things away from a community, even if 5 people are using something, may not make their threshold, but it might be in an area of our community that's very important to us, that it remain there. And I want to say in that. And if it's not the board, I'm okay with a assigned person who's like our guru on e-bikes. But somebody in our family has to make that decision, not the vendor, until this becomes a regular business model where they do, because the next step is also they wanted to get some advertising done on the bikes. We're going to have a say in a lot of this, because at the end of the day, our name goes on everything. So I'm not married to the board has to have everything. I am married to the person, I keep pointing to Maddie because I have a sense that or Paul could do this too, that our staff be on both sides of the equation. That's actually the most important part to me. Now, whether the staff appropriately and timely, relays information to the board as needed, that's on them. And, it's never perfect, but we'll ask that they do that. It's never exact science. There's a lot of other things.
There are things too, and in this
So
regard,
that's a change in the lease.
yeah.
That's on that, you mentioned 3 items, that's one of them. Is everybody okay with that? Because I don't want to have a fight over this, but is everybody okay with that? That we change the wording, now we have to find somebody, et cetera, okay. So there were three things, right? But actually, two of them we just talked about. What was the third one? I feel like there was a third piece, just two, okay.
Yeah, so, and look, there's a lot of ways, like, these are not major issues, like, it's pretty intuitive. I think even if we had discussed it, we probably end up in the same places because they're logical places. That said, we can communicate, in emails, just keeping people updated. If the board wants it brought to a work session, we can do that too. That's not an issue. And, it was a group decision. It wasn't just Maddie running wild here. We all were in on it. So,
Yeah.
but we are trying a combination of keeping things moving, but, again, sometimes it's, something seems intuitive. But that said, I think for all the reasons that the mayor said, what the board expressed, public-private partnerships are different than private sector initiatives.
Right.
And the public has to maintain control in that
And that
partnership.
would be my argument. The other piece that I think Bob is asking for, aside from communication, which is always, listen, I've always said this, half the marriages in the country end up in divorce, usually because of communication issue. So it's an art and a science, let's be honest. So we always want to get better. But I do think that if the board has requests, like we do for anything else, that says, I think we should have a place on, fill in the blank. I don't see a process for that. You know what I mean? So I think the board, in fairness, should have had a little bit more time, or say, it says, hey, we're looking at 3 new locations, guys. Email. I don't think it's a work session. Are there ideas? Or Bob thinks of something in June and says, I just drove by, whatever. I think, like, I'm the one that thought near the aqueduct would be a good place, because I think people should be encouraged to use the aqueduct. It's a beautiful, and you're allowed to use e-bikes once we learn that. That would be sort of a cool thing to do. But like, we might want to say, what's my process as a board member to say, constituent asked for this, like, how do we put that into the workflow that we want to?
No, that's
bike thing,
that's
whatever.
valid point. We have no problem with that.
I also had one more question, because it's nowhere in the leases. Are people allowed to park their private bikes on these racks? Because they're not docking stations per se, but they are docking
Well,
stations.
And Maddie's not here. There are two different types of docking stations. They have some that are actually charging e-bike stations and some that are just,
The ones we have in the village, I thought were not charging
well,
the bikes. that they
I
exchange
have
the
asked them
batteries.
to specify.
Okay.
Because the agreement is unclear. It
Okay.
mentions both types. So I asked them.
Well, right now, they're charging, they go back home and charge. But there are people now who are using them because they're not in use, and I've seen,
Yeah.
people putting their bicycle. It's something that Drop Mobility is gonna have, like, we're gonna have
They
to
have to
understand
make
their
that clear.
policy, and
Yeah.
then we're gonna either have to put signage, but I don't necessarily, it wasn't as much of an issue when the bikes were there all the time, because it was obvious that that's what it was for. I think when they're not being used during the winter, that's when I've seen people using it. We'll talk to Drop Mobility and see how they want to handle it.
Clarify, because I would also argue that once the summer comes, when people drive by and see a private bike docked there, then go, oh, I didn't know we could do that. I'll start doing that too. So you will see, the more people use it, the more they'll do stuff. It's very clearly in the city that you cannot, if they're docking stations, you cannot put a private.
Yeah,
bike
they were
in
not,
this.
they're not charging there, so, but still, I think to the point of damages of liability and
they don't
anything,
want it
I
so
want to
that
understand
they
what their
could-
policy is and how they would enforce it and how they would want us to communicate it. I don't want to start,
I just,
know.
the more it gets used, the more you're gonna see this. And
yep.
I was told that it holds 10 bikes. I always thought it was 5 because you could put them from both sides. So I think, like, in some ways, that's a good thing. It means more and more people are paying attention to this.
Yeah, no, it's great.
In some ways, not so great, because unless we have an answer, the vacuum will be filled with the gas that it gets filled with. So if we could get more on that. So I think you got the direction, right, Stuart?
I am
about
good.
Where we're going?
I'm good and we can have
And you
a,
still have a name too, the guru is gonna be. Did we just wait till Maddie left the room to appoint her? or
We
what?
appointed Paul. It's
I
Paul.
was actually gonna say Paul, yeah. So Paul, the communication to the board is now on you. As you heard.
My-
in this
my
entire
phone's
meeting.
blowing up
Oh, look,
now.
he took his mute button off. Oh, all right, he heard me. All right.
Just to say
next-
no problem, not a problem.
Oh,
No
okay,
problem.
Thanks.
Thank you, Paul. Okay, next, much to Dale's delight, Popeyes is coming to, Ossining.
God.
Um, And
I have just lost all my love for Dale in one fell
Dale
swoop.
really
That
loves-
and her,
Dale-
now in her
Dale
love
really
for
likes
Pringles
Popeyes.
potato chips. Love
So,
Popeyes.
Popeyes is coming and,
Yeah, I saw the building today.
so, we will be talking about the easement agreement that they require.
Okay, what do we got?
Okay, this is an easement agreement which is required by the site plan resolution from August of 2024. It would essentially allow the village the right to enter and maintain the 20-inch stormwater pipe that is that goes in the back of that property. There is a very small piece of what is called the menu board that will actually be in the easement area. And the agreement is that if we can't work around it, basically the owner of the location will remove it so we could do our work and they will put it back in place. So we won't have to get involved with that. But it is required, and they need this in order to move further in terms of getting their CO, because part of this is to have an agreement in place. It will run with the land, so whoever buys it after that is going to have the same responsibilities. So that's the long and short of it.
So just one quick question. Say we have to get in there and the sign has to come down and there's major excavation. We tear up their pad and stuff. Who's responsible to replace that pad?
Well, let me say it this way.
Are we
They
only
have to
responsible for the
take-
couple
they
inches?
have to take the pad out, because what would happen is we're going to try to do the work without taking anything by the pad.
Understood.
If it has to come out, they're taking it out and it's on their dime to put it back.
Okay, that's all.
And I think you have to make sure that we get to make the decision. It's not that we make a decision and they argue with us about.
Oh, it's
the
in,
fact
that's what's
that's
provided
all
for
right.
in here. That's in here. Because the way, if you look at the site plan, you'll notice it literally just touches the edge.
No? You're just gonna let it go?
No, we'll stay on Route 9.
Okay. Oh, I see, because they're so close to Route 9, that's why. Yeah.
So we'll have a resolution next week authorizing the board, authorizing the village manager to sign the easement agreement. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. A few weeks ago, our friends from Sustainable Westchester were here talking about, the Westchester Power Agreement. While they did follow up with some Ossining specific information that the board requested, we really don't have much more information on this. And there are some next steps, that the board will need to, determine if they want to go forward with the agreement. As we've done historically, with the understanding that, there are a lot of unknowns. And this is really, an issue where, if you go forward, from a clean energy point of view, one could argue that it's a sound decision to make for the planet and the environment. There is a cost implication. And while anybody can opt out of the program at any time, it does place an additional burden on people if they are opt out and they forget or they don't realize they can. I think we're all pretty well aware of the pros and cons of doing this. So I will defer to Stuart on the specifics for the next steps.
Thanks. Thank you, Karen. Folks, again, as Karen said, this has been discussed. The real question is, what does the board want to do? There are two documents. One is the memorandum of understanding. That's between the village and Sustainable Westchester. And the other document is the electric service agreement that is essentially signed by the provider, whoever that provider is, because that has not been determined yet, Sustainable Westchester and the village. It's really the board's decision as to what they want to do. The draft of the memorandum of understanding was sent around before. Mr. Tedrow was here and gave some discussion. I know there was some discussion by the board. It's just a matter in terms of what does the board want to do in terms of the next step. The immediate next step, if you want to proceed, would be to authorize the manager to execute the memorandum of understanding. But again, that's a decision you folks make. So before a resolution is presented, I just wanted to get a sense of what the board wants to do.
Any comments? That haven't, on this, in which way your guys are heading on this?
Well, I'm gonna go back to when he was here. Trustee Yost asked about, you want me to buy something, but we don't know what we're paying,
Right,
and it's out in the future. Is that part of the unknowns that you're talking about?
Yep.
Precisely. When we did this last year, it was the same situation.
Yep.
Which is that the RFP for the provider, those numbers actually come out later. And those will get baked into the electric service agreement. At this time, we don't know what those numbers are. We didn't last year either when we did it. So right now, we do not know what the provider will basically be offering in terms of the rates
For this new,
for the new cycle.
so right
That's
now,
correct.
until we know the new, we're on the old.
Until this agreement ends, which I believe is with the last meter reading in probably November, if I'm not something like that. I
it's
have
like this,
to just double
this is
check.
the standard thing.
Will terminate on the first meter read date of November 30th, 2025. So that would be, that's when the current agreement ends. It's November 30th of 2025. Or the first meter reading right after that, I'm sorry.
Okay. Comments? It's either a yay or a nay at this point, folks. Okay, Dana? Guys? It could be an uncomfortable yay, but, or I guess abstain or whatever. Well, to be honest, I think this is a watershed year. I think we've been very kind for the past couple of years. This is a big year in utilities. This is a big year in energy futures, which is really what they're in the business of doing. They have a new administration for about a year now. Like last year, the new folks were new, but they're not going to be new next year. And I think next year there might be a no on this after many years of us being, I think, one of the first municipalities to be supportive of this, because this isn't all they do. It's the same, but Westchester does other things. But I think this is a watershed year because we're so uncomfortable. And because I think there's just so many other elements that are in play. And it's a very tough business, by the way. This is not a comment just on them. This is a very complicated energy business. So, we talked about Con Ed a week ago. It's a complicated time. I think this is for me, it's a yay, because I understand that we're going to sit here next year and there is some possibility of a no after many years of working with them, because at some point you have to be fair to the people who have to pay all these bills. There is an opt-out, and that number was higher than I expected. So I think Karen and I spoke a little while ago. We're going to have to also, in fairness to our constituents, be very clear that people can opt out. Where they'll opt out to, where they'll go, because everything is going up, I don't know, to be honest. This is a playing field that's all rising. I don't know what the other options are going to be either. We're just talking about this one, but the other options ain't so good either. So I think it's a watershed year, which I did not say a year ago or the year before that. And it's a 1-year contract, yeah?
Yes, Mayor.
We used to sign 3-year contract, just FYI.
I'm happy it would be a 1-year contract. I would like to, if possible, like try to put some sort of like operationalizing around the opt-out process to make it a little bit more, and I don't know if you can do that in the contract or not, but that is part of the implementation. Like, they think they can do a better job, and we should make sure that they do a better job of publicizing that there is a choice for people.
I mean, they stated clearly, but when you get that thing in the mail, I mean, you need, like, I found it difficult to read.
Yeah.
And our logo is on the front, by the way. And I know you all get this. So, all right. Not the greatest written material, and they'll argue that they're forced into it, blah, blah, blah. But I think the communication that we do need to ask is that the opt-out has to be understood, and that you can opt back in. You can jump in and out. People don't get that. And not everybody pays attention to all this stuff. I'm willing to go with a yay because it's a 1 year. If it were not a 1 year, I would absolutely not it's just becoming difficult, but it's difficult across all the utilities right now. Anybody changing their, are you, because if you're putting in for next, we have to sign something, right?
It would be the memorandum of understanding to sign. The more municipalities that are in, the theoretically, the better rate you'll get from whoever is going to be doing for the RFP, because there'll be more subscribers. That's,
Which is what they explain why they're doing it now and not waiting for later, because they have to commit that these are
That's
Right.
municipalities. That is the futures that they're negotiating. Yeah. All right. Any comments of no's, or so we know what to do, sign? or not?
I just at some point would like to see some sort of a webinar explaining. Cause I don't think anybody could read their Con Ed bill as it is,
Well, it's
all
not
right.
just the bill, it's also what they send out in the mail. then.
Right, what they send out, and it's very tough to read. So I'm a reluctant yay,
Yeah, I
so, but it's 1 year. And we'll go from there.
know. Next year. I
But there should be more education on it. I don't know how,
So a
but-
lot of the education is about sustainability and the environment, and that's a good thing.
no, I'm
But
talking
at some
about,
point, people look at their pocketbooks and go, listen, I appreciate that, but.
right, show me
I
the
need to
money.
Understand, yeah,
Just like Jerry Maguire, show me the money. Because
because. people are being hit
I've
hard.
yet to see where
Right.
what am I getting? Or what am I not getting?
Right.
That's
Well,
all.
that's
And I
fair.
think a lot of people need to understand that.
Yep,
okay.
I think we're all in agreement on that. Well, I think we are. All right, so we good to go with this? Yeah,
Resolution next week. Thank you.
okay.
Okay, and our last and final topic is an awning application for the VIP Sports Bar at 12 Croton Avenue. Or to Stewart.
I have,
There's nothing-
that was the location of Sirenita Lounge, right next door to us.
Next door.
Okay,
Okay, it's a new, they have an application pending with the village, but they also have an application pending with the State Liquor Authority. So I basically was running this on a double track so that if they in fact get their approval, they can put their awning up rather than hold back on the awning, since this has been pending in the building department since the middle of March. So I figured I could get this before you. It's just a matter of approving it. They're not going to put anything up because at this point they don't have their approvals in terms of opening. But they did, I do a swatch, so I can provide you a swatch if you'd like to see, and with pictures of their proposed awning. But if they do, let me say this, if they're looking for a cabaret, or if they're looking, that obviously will come before you.
I was just gonna ask
All we have received so far is that they're pending, applications with the State Liquor Authority for, retail licenses. To date, I don't believe we've received a complete application from them. So I think that that's still out there. But again, I'm bringing this here because I didn't want to hold up one for the other. That doesn't mean that they're putting it up, because unless they're going to open something up with no refreshments, because they don't even have a refreshment license yet. So that's it. I will pass this around if folks would like to sort of see what it's going to look like and touch the swatch.
So Stuart,
Yes,
I'm refreshing my memory that the awning's within code that they're submitting, correct?
yeah. We're doing it because of, anything that goes over our property, we have to.
No, I understand. And do we know who the owner of this
I don't have,
sports bar yet?
well, I do have the application upstairs. I just don't, it's not Mr. It's
No,
not.
no relation,
it's no-
not a daughter,
No,
not a,
as we did recently with Hacienda, what we're doing now is that, for example, if you're going into a location where you previously we denied or whatever, we're putting in that anyone who used to work at that location or ownership in particular is not going to have a contact with that
Okay.
place. So should that come up, the same would apply here, but we're just not at that stage yet.
all right, thank you.
All right, how are we feeling about this, people? Everybody okay with it? All right.
Thank you.
I love it. I'm upset.
We tried.
The color.
We try to help.
Okay,
Okay, that concludes our agenda for this evening.
all righty. We're going into exec.
Okay, so do we have a
Did
motion to
somebody-
go into executive session for matters of personnel? All in favor? Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, a reminder for those that are watching this. Next Thursday, 6 PM is the legislative session at the courthouse, right? Did we agree on location?
16
It's-
Croton.
Sorry, here, 16 Croton. Have a great evening.